Whenever the subject of Doctor Who comes up in conversation, I think the one person that will always be mentioned in some capacity is David Tennant, the actor who brought the 10th and more recently the 14th Doctor to life on screen. David's first turn as the Doctor made the show even more popular than it ever had been, and paved the way for its popularity to grow. Now, I have covered this topic before, except it wasn't in a what-if scenario, so in today's video I'm going to do just that. This is what I think would have happened if David Tennant had stayed for Series 5, and I'll be pursuing this from an in-narrative perspective.
The multiverse is a pathway to many possibilities that some might consider unnatural.
So before we can actually look at this scenario in deep detail, it's very important to note here that this nearly did happen in real life. When Rusty T. Davies was planning to leave and hand over the reins, or more appropriately the keys to the TARDIS, over to Stephen Moffat, there was some uncertainty and confusion among fans as to whether David Tennant was planning to continue into the next series of the revival, this being Series 5. Due to this uncertainty, Moffat had actually drafted 2 scripts for the Series 5 opener, which became the 11th Hour. One featuring the newly regenerated Doctor meeting a young Amelia Pond, which we eventually got in 2010, but the second draft, interestingly, included this scenario, but it was an injured 10th Doctor crash landing in Amelia Pond's garden. Now, in what I would describe as a typical quote-unquote Moff twist, it would have been revealed in the episode that the 10th Doctor we see at the beginning of the story would have ended up in the garden not because of the events in the end of time, but because this version of 10 is a future version of the Doctor, and following this encounter with young Amelia would regenerate. Later on we would see an earlier version of the 10th Doctor land in Amelia's garden, having had no memory of meeting her before, and the story would essentially unfold from there, with Amy realising the Doctor she met was in her future, and this would be the main storyline for Series 5, as we, the audience, will begin to theorise how 10 would end up beaten and bruised in young Amy's garden on that night. So here's the interesting part. If Tennant had stayed for Series 5, we would have seen him travelling with Amy Pond. An interesting dynamic I'm sure a lot of us Whovians would have been curious about since we knew that Tennant almost stayed for another series. So would this dynamic have been different to what we saw with Rose, Martha and later on Donna? I'm going to say maybe, simply because I think Amy was a bit more mature than both Rose and Martha when they first joined the Doctor, but I would put Amy in terms of maturity next to Donna because the Doctor in that situation was just looking for a mate, and I think he'd take Amy on board the TARDIS for the same reasons. So the next question is, how would Series 5 have changed with 10 instead of 11? I think there would be a few tonal changes, but other than that, I wouldn't expect too much to be altered regarding the stories of the individual episodes. However, I think the Doctor would still catch on to the cracks in time, and I think Amy would eventually reveal to him what happened that night, and how the Doctor apparently crash-landed in her garden. 10 would have no memory of this encounter, and realises that him crashing into Amy's garden that night is in his future. So the next detail I think would not massively change would be River Song. Now, I don't think the story with her meeting the Doctor out of order would change massively. In fact, I think 10 would keep much more secret about her history to help preserve time. The events of the Weeping Angels two-parter would still go ahead as planned, except the ending of Flesh and Stone, which is very controversial, and I would change that for obvious reasons. Instead, I would have a scene where Amy is having doubts about marrying Rory, which is kind of common, I think, and the 10th Doctor convinces her to go through with it. So in this timeline, Amy would not make a pass at the Doctor, and thank God for that. Now, everything from here would go as planned, with the Doctor bringing on Rory and then headed to 2020, where they take on the Silurians. Rory is still shot and absorbed by the crack in time, and that's where he still dies, so I don't think that part would change massively. The rest of the episodes carry on as they did, with the Doctor and Amy meeting Vincent van Gogh, along with the Doctor meeting Craig Owens and becoming his lodger, so I don't think that part would change massively. And that would then bring us to the events of the Series 5 finale, the Pandorica Opens / The Big Bang. In this timeline, I don't think an awful lot would change about the story itself massively. 10 would still be imprisoned in the Pandorica by the Alliance, and the Auton Rory would still shoot Amy. The future Doctor would show up and give Rory the sonic screwdriver to free his past self from the Pandorica, and from there the events of the series would go as planned. The difference here, however, is when the Doctor wakes up in the TARDIS after rebooting the universe, he's now on the verge of regeneration, and now knowing how the timeline's meant to go, purposefully crash lands the TARDIS in young Amelia Pond's garden. After leaving the young Amy, the Doctor, now alone in the TARDIS, regenerates into 11. However, the difference here is that the regeneration would not be as volatile, so the TARDIS would likely stay in flight as it did normally. Following this, I think we would see the Doctor travel to the future and meet Kazran Sardik during the events of A Christmas Carol, but in this timeline, Amy and Rory wouldn't be there, so the story would go as planned with the crashing spaceship, but the Doctor using time travel would help redeem Kazran and change history. Following this adventure, the Doctor would then travel to Amy and Rory's wedding and reunite with them, and from here the events of the rest of the series I think would proceed as they did originally. I did in fact have an alternate sequence of events where 11 in this timeline doesn't take Amy and Rory on as companions after the finale and instead meets Clara, which would give us more of the Clara and 11 dynamic that a lot of fans wanted to see if Matt Smith hadn't left. But for me, that's going to conclude this what-if scenario and what I think would have happened if David Tennant had stayed for Series 5. And again, this was all from an in-narrative perspective from within the Doctor Who universe. If there's any other what-ifs you'd love to see me take a look at, then leave your suggestions in the comments below. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe, thanks for watching, and I will see you all soon.